Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video.
All right, so what you guys are looking at right now is paragraph 3N, the documents, fees, compliance, time for performance. So this is the stuff that's, it's got the seller's documents where they have the time to do it, to return it, and then it has some other things that are combined in it. So first off, seller delivery of documents. The default on that is 7 days after, acceptance. And when you look at here where it references paragraph 14A, in paragraph 14A, it's going to give you basically a list of everything that has to be delivered to the buyer from the seller in that 7-day period. So for us as listing agents, it's important that we try to get the documents done as soon as possible. I think that sometimes there are listing agents that don't even start to look at disclosures and the reports and the things that are necessary until they have an offer accepted. And the danger in that is that you could get blindsided as a listing agent on there being issues based on disclosures being filled out, reports that are required, and then you find out after the fact when you've got your offer accepted. So for example, if I as seller, and what we're going to do, I'm going to jump ahead to paragraph 14A so we could look at that right now. But if I'm the listing agent, so don't get too dizzy looking at the screen because I'm going to scroll by a few pages here. So 14A, seller delivery of documents, right? Seller shall within time specified in 3N1, which we talked about by default is 7 days unless you change that to something else. Deliver to buyer all reports, disclosures, information reports for which seller is responsible as specified in, and here's the list. So what you can do is you could go back to all these paragraphs, and anything that falls in those paragraphs that relates to your transaction, that's what has to be delivered. So anything in paragraph 7A, 9B6, paragraph 10, paragraph 11A, 11B, 11C, 11D, 11H, 11K, 11L, M, N, O, and 13A, D, and paragraph 32. Anything that falls in those paragraphs that is a document that is related to your transaction has to be delivered to the buyer within 7 days. So that includes all of the statutory disclosures, right? So the TDS, the SPQ, the lead-based paint, all of those have to be delivered. The NHD report has to be delivered, right? The NHD report has to be done. The preliminary title report has to be done. Any city inspection reports, any city required reports have to be delivered in that period of time, okay? So when you start to think about things like 9A report, City of Southgate inspection, City of Huntington Park, City of, Compton, whatever it is, there is a definite delay in the time of ordering to having those reports, those inspections performed and getting those reports back. And what happens is if I am now outside of the time period, so once I go past day 7, right, I could be extending the investigation period of the buyer because I have yet to provide them with documentation. And so as a listing agent, what I want to make sure happens is that I'm prepared ahead of time so that when I do open an escrow and I reduce the inspection and investigation periods for the buyer, that I am now providing them everything that is required of me as seller and listing agent so that there is no delay in their removing contingencies. But if I wait until I accept an offer and then have to compile all of this information, it then becomes likely that I'm going to have to afford the buyer more time on their contingency than I wanted to because of my lack of effort. Okay. So the one thing I would tell you is when we go back and we're looking at in paragraph 3N1, we're looking at the seller delivery of documents and it's 7 days after acceptance. Keep in mind, okay, keep in mind that anytime I'm delayed, okay, the now contingency period for the buyer is either the days the amount of days that they agree to, right? So let's just keep it simple for now. The default is the buyer has 17 days to review the documents, do their investigations, do their inspections, and remove that contingency. Terrific. I, as seller, have 7 days to deliver that. If our contingency period is 17 days, okay, for the buyer, and I deliver all seller's documents at any point, even if I'm a little late, between day 1 and day 12, the buyer will have until day 17 to remove their contingency, right? If the 17-day contingency is what we've agreed to. If I go beyond day 12, if I'm at day 13, 14, then the buyer has 5 days after receipt of that required delivery of document before they are required to remove their investigation contingency. So, for most of us listening and watching, we as listing agents and even some buyer's agents as tactics are reducing our investigation period. We're countering them back and telling them they have 7 days or 10 days to remove their contingencies for investigation. But we're still not delivering on time the documents that we want because we don't address that amount of time that the seller has to provide those. So again, for an example, let's say that I as listing agent have countered back to the buyer and said, you have 10 days before you remove your investigation period, your contingency. I have now 7 days to deliver all of my documents. If I deliver anything after day 7, right? So if let's say I give them everything on day 7 except for the NHD report or except for the city presale inspection report, I give that to them on day 9. They now have 5 more days before they have to remove their investigation contingency instead of the 10 days we agreed upon. So as a responsible listing agent, if I'm going to take the time to reduce the amount of time that the buyer has to investigate the condition of the property, because I feel like that's a prudent thing to do, and I'm not saying it isn't, but if I'm going to do that, then I also have to take the next step that says I am prepared for that shorter period of time for investigations, and I have everything that's required of the seller to be delivered, and I'm going to deliver it to them at day of acceptance. I'm not going to wait 7 days. I'm not going to do anything. So if you're a listing agent that likes to reduce the amount of time that the buyer has for their investigations, then your operation, your MO should be, I already have, before I counter somebody that they have a very short period of time for investigations, I already have everything done. I have the city presale. I have the disclosures done. I have the NHD report. I have the prelim already. I have it all. And here you go, at acceptance, here's all your disclosures. Now there is no chance of delay on your part. No one can blame you, listing agent or seller, for delaying the contingency from being removed by the buyer. Is that fair? So again, just make sure that these things are matching up. Know it. And as a buyer's agent, if I know that day 7 comes and I haven't received all of the documents that we talked about in paragraph 14A, all those paragraphs that are covered, if I haven't gotten it, my next action should be a seller notice to perform. And I know that people have an adverse reaction to the idea of sending a notice to perform, especially a buyer's agent is hesitant to use notices to perform because they don't want to cancel the deal. And that's fine. You don't have to. There is no requirement when I send a notice to perform that it must cancel if the other party doesn't perform. Nothing says that. I have the right to cancel, but I'm not required to. But if we start thinking of notices to perform as proof that I, as either listing agent or buyer's agent, am performing for you the way I'm supposed to, that I'm trying to keep everything on track, if we start looking at it that way as opposed to, oh, it's got to be a cancellation, well, then maybe we'll start using it a little better and we'll have better communication and there'll be a record of everything that happens in the transaction. Because right now we do everything verbally, right? How many buyer's agents do I mean, there's so many buyers that I talk to that they'll be like, oh, you know, the listing agent's asking me to remove my contingencies. And I said, oh, they sent you a notice to perform? Oh, no, they called me and asked me to do it. Okay, so number one, that phone call doesn't compel you to do anything. The fact that they have to call you, though, that you're not communicating with them is an issue, but that's a whole other problem. And vice versa. I hear from buyer's agents that will say, the seller hasn't sent us any documentation yet. What do we do? Send a notice to perform. Oh, I don't want to do that because I don't want to cancel. You don't have to. But at least you could go back when your buyer says, why did this deal fall apart? You could say the seller or the listing agent just didn't hold up their end of the bargain. Here's where I requested the documents via email. When they didn't respond via email, I sent a seller notice to perform requesting the documents. They still didn't perform. So your instruction to me was to continue on and see if we could get them to give us the documents. And when they didn't, you finally got fed up and we canceled. But I have proof. And then with that proof, I also am communicating with my client properly because I have to talk them through and have them sign stuff and understand what's happening in the transaction. So we just have to start looking at it as a tool, less as like it's a nuclear bomb, right? Because it's not. It's just a tool, and it's a really valuable tool in being able to show your client that you're doing everything that's within your power on their behalf to help this transaction move forward and close. Okay. Any questions about that? Any questions about the seller delivery of documents? Okay. Sign and return escrow holder provisions and instructions. Again, 5 days after the delivery of those escrow instructions, they're supposed to be signed and returned back to escrow. If they are not, that also can constitute another notice to perform, whether that be to notice the seller or notice the buyer. Because, listen, I know what happens is a lot of times for us as agents, we try to like bundle everything together to get our clients to sign it because we don't want them to have to sign multiple times. But there are certain things that time is of the essence. One of those is the escrow instructions. Is that there's a time limit on that. It's a different time limit than the disclosures and the other reports. So if I get escrow instructions and escrow is willing to take digital signatures on those escrow instructions, then I should be sending those things out DocuSign right away. If it's the hesitation is that you have to set an appointment to meet with your assistant or your TC or whoever's doing your signings for you, unfortunately, you're going to have to make multiple appointments. Because if I don't sign the escrow instructions and get them back within that 5-day period, and the seller then takes the initiative to send me a notice to perform, and I only now have 2 days to make that happen, and I can't make it happen because I can't get the seller in, they can't come in for an appointment, I could put myself in a position of losing a deal over not signing escrow instructions. So we have to take those time periods seriously too. And luckily what happens is most agents out there don't know that they have the ability to send a notice to perform and cancel when a buyer or a seller isn't signing escrow instructions. The agents don't know that that's an option. And so they're not taking advantage of it. But why would we want to put ourselves in a position where one day there's going to be an agent that knows what they're doing and is going to take advantage of the idea that your sellers or your buyers were slow on returning disclosures because you wanted to consolidate every signature into one appointment? Does that make sense? So I think it's going to become a rethink on how we handle that, just to make sure that we're doing it fine. Time to pay for fees for ordering HOA documents. That one technically is, it's a problem because it's normally 3 days after acceptance. problem is that most of us rely on escrow to make that order, and escrow is not going to make that order until the buyer's deposit gets in. So again, from the listing side, if escrow isn't paying for the ordering of the instructions because they're waiting on funds from the buyer, you could get in a place where a buyer may have a way to back out if they want to because you haven't paid and ordered that. Okay. N4, install smoke detectors, alarms. So what I was going to say that is you may want to, as a listing agent, extend that, show that in a different way, add some more time to that, dependent on what, how long it's going to take for that stuff to get paid for and ordered. So you might want to add a week, make it a week instead of 3 days, make it 7 days, something like that, only because you got to wait the 3 business days for the deposit to go in, all that, how the time periods work. Install smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heater bracing. So it says 7 days after acceptance. Here's the thing. Maybe what you should do is when you're going through your listing appointment and you're walking through the property, I don't like the way my microphone, it keeps popping up in my face, and you're walking through the property and you notice that it's not done, or maybe it is, you should have the seller do all that work prior to marketing, because it has to get done in the first 7 days. So why put the added pressure on we're getting an offer accepted? Every offer that you go through is going to need the smoke detectors installed properly, is going to need carbon monoxide detectors, and the water heat bracing is going to have to get done. Every offer. So if that's the case, advise the seller to get it done right away so you don't have to worry about that 7 days. Or if you haven't done it, then you better counter back and make sure it makes sense on the amount of time. Now, a lot of that stuff that's not done becomes an issue for the appraisal, right? They don't see the smoke detectors. They don't see the carbon monoxide detectors. It's not wrapped. So if you've now shortened the time periods for the buyer to get the appraisal done, and the appraiser comes out and those items aren't done, then that's going to constitute a reinspection because we've taken too long to do that. And if there is a reinspection, per the contract, the seller is going to be responsible for that reinspection fee if there is one. So again, as listing agent, take initiative. Why not? Let's start to reduce the amount of hurdles prior to marketing so we don't have to deal with them once a transaction is started. So I got something over here in the chat. Let me see what this says. Sorry, my mouse is acting funny. What do we do? Sorry. What do we do when disclosures are sent with different names when the property was in escrow previously? Do we request new one with our buyers' names? Sometimes the listing agents want our buyers to cross out. No, you shouldn't be doing that. And if you're listing agents and you're giving disclosures that are signed by a previous buyer or have a previous buyer's name on it, stop. Don't do that. Do the job right. Put the information for the new escrow. I mean, you should have a set of disclosures that wasn't signed by anybody. Yeah, you have the ones that were signed in your transaction, but you should have a beginning set that was just signed by the sellers and not signed by the buyer. Use that one. That's pretty straightforward. So, look, you can reject as much as you want. You can tell them, no, we're not signing this. But if the listing agent says, well, that's all we're giving you, you don't have much of a choice to compel them. What you would then do is say, okay, to my buyer, this is not the right way to do it. This is what they're requesting of us to do. And really, if we want to move forward, we're going to have to do. I need you to tell me that you're okay with doing it. Yes, I'm fine with doing it. I don't care. Then you're going to send an email to your buyer. I just want to clarify the conversation we had. They sent us improper disclosures. You've chosen to move forward with the transaction. I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page before we move forward. You're going to send an email so that way your buyer can't ever come back and say, well, you did something wrong. That's it. It's just difficult when we're dealing with outside agents, and I see it all the time when I'm going through and looking at your files and reviewing stuff. We have no control of that outside agent, right? There's nothing we could do to compel them to do their job properly. All we could do is do ours. So in cases like that, we do that. We instruct the buyer hey, this person, we instruct the buyer or the seller, this person is not doing things the proper way. Because they're not doing it the proper way, you have an option to, as buyer, walk away, as seller, compel them to do things properly by using notices to perform if they're appropriate. And if they don't, then we could cancel. We just have to make sure that we're giving our client, whether buyer or seller, the proper direction on what is happening with the forms being filled out improperly or not being returned. Then getting their instructions on how to proceed, right? Not us telling them what they should do. Get their instructions on how to proceed. Hey, listen, you know what? I know what you've told me. This is incorrect, but I still want to keep moving forward. Great. Then I'm going to send the email to the client, and I'm going to ask them to respond to the email. And I'm going to say, we spoke about X issue that is being handled improperly by buyer agent, listing agent, buyer, seller, however you want to phrase it. You have instructed me to move forward the transaction even with that issue, and I just wanted to clarify. If they respond to it, then you're cool. You just move on. I think there's so many times that we as agents take on the responsibility of the ones that are going to make the decision for the client, as opposed to make them a part of the process. You know, that's part of what we should be doing. And especially when you're a buyer's agent, that's the conversation you're going to have when you're doing these buyer consultations before you start is, by the way, when things come up, we're going to get together. I'm going to ask you what you would like to do. I'm going to give you my advice. I'm going to say what I think is the right thing that should happen, maybe the way it should go. You're going to tell me your thoughts, and we're going to make a decision based on what you think is best for you, and that's how we're going to move forward. Like, that should be your communication level with your clients always, is that we're going to collaborate on any decisions that get made. I'm not going to just be there going like, this is what happens. When we do things like that, and we do it because we think we're giving this great service to them because we're just taking action on their behalf and getting the deals closed, what happens when there is one thing that becomes an issue, when there is a problem, when there is some kind of a dispute, they turn to you and say, well, you did that. You told me that's what we should do. And you took action, and you have no proof that there was communication with the client where they were on board with taking action like that at the same time. They have amnesia. They're going to forget. Okay. So with the smoke detectors and things like that, get those things done early so you're not dealing with those and delaying your transactions going forward. The evidence of representative authority is 3 days. That works for both sides, right? So if I'm working with a seller that is a entity, right? So it's a trust, it's a probate, it's a corporation, a partnership, anything like that. When I do that entity seller signature, I have 3 days after acceptance to show proof to the other side that the person that signed on behalf of that entity had the authority to sign. And vice versa. I'm the buyer's agent. I have 3 days after we sign everything and it's accepted to send them proof that the person that signed our purchase agreement has the authority to sign on behalf of that entity. That's what that states. So again, here's where it comes in to collect that information prior to writing offers, collect that information prior to marketing listings so that you have it and you can send it immediately after acceptance with the rest of your disclosures and other documentation. And you could do that as buyer too, because if you have to now try to gather the information, or maybe they have the incorrect information or it's not structured the way it should be, I only have 3 days. And if I don't provide it again, now I have another chance at a notice to perform where a party can cancel the transaction. I want to try to eliminate and close all these loopholes as early as possible, especially if I'm the listing agent. I want to take those away. And if I'm the buyer's agent, I want to make sure that the seller's as committed as my buyer is. Because if I did the work to show them properties and get this offer accepted and do all the stuff that we have to do as buyer's agents, once I get them into escrow, my ultimate goal is to get it closed. And to get it closed and protect them and do the right things and do them on time. But I don't want to have loopholes wide open where the buyer has the ability to walk away when they want to. I want them to be committed too, because I worked hard for them. Okay? So I have to keep that in mind. Any questions on paragraph 3N before I move on? No? Okay. So let's look at items included and excluded. Okay. One of the things that I think happens a lot of times, and I see this very often, is that people get check happy. They start checking off stuff to be left in. And one of the biggest mistakes I see is people get checking boxes for stuff to remain in that isn't even in the property at the time they saw it. Now, I think probably a majority of the time this happens is because agents still insist on using templates. So when they use a template, it carries over information from previous escrows. And instead of us being thorough and rewriting an offer or checking the offer if we're going to use the templates to make sure that there is nothing in the offer that doesn't pertain to our current transaction, we don't do that. We're quick. We want to do things as fast as possible. And because we do that, we just make errors of omission, right? That's it. So double check. Please, if you're using a template, go into your items included and excluded. Make sure that if there's something checked off that you want to include, that it actually is in the property. There's so many times where I see, dishwasher and refrigerators checked off, and then the agent will come in and say, hey, they're asking for this and we never had it. Now, just because I check off refrigerator and dishwasher and your property doesn't have it, I do that as buyer's agent, it doesn't compel you to now put one in. Right? Like, it doesn't say, well, you said that this property you agreed that it would come with the refrigerator that was included in sale. The included items have to be in the property when you write the offer. Just because it's checked legally is not going to require you to provide it. Could it be a legal issue, like it turn into a problem where there's a dispute that you have to deal with the clients? Yeah, absolutely. But legally, are you required to install something that may be on this included list that wasn't in the property? No. So as buyer's agents, when we're talking about making sure that we're writing the offer as strong as possible, sometimes templates are our enemy because we forget to make changes. We leave things in that were from another offer, and it makes it look like we don't know what we're doing. Because think about it from a listing agent's perspective. If I receive an offer and it's asking for stoves and refrigerators and washers and dryers and the property doesn't have that, there's two things that are going to happen. Now I got to counter this and add this to the counters that these items are not included with the sale of the property. And I think that the agent that has submitted this offer doesn't really know what they're doing, and it makes me hesitant to want to move forward with them. Listing agents, please make sure you're looking at this, right? Because I think what happens too for listing agents when I see these issues pop up is that they don't even look at items included or excluded because they know the house has nothing in it. Right? Like, so I'm selling you a vacant house. There's nothing in it. There's no furniture. There's no appliances. There's nothing in there. So I don't even have to worry about items included because there's nothing included or excluded from the sale that I made as a list. And I think sometimes, again, you just get kind of blasé about it and you pass over it because there's nothing in the house. You still have to address it. So if you are a listing agent and you get an offer from somebody that's requesting items to remain in the property with the sale and they aren't there or they're not going to remain, counter it and make sure that they're aware that those items aren't going to remain. Vice versa. If I, as listing agent, have marketed that the sale of this property is going to include the stove, the refrigerator, and the washer and dryer, right? The reason that they're being included is because the seller doesn't want to take them with them. They're like, hey, you're taking it. This is your problem. So if I have put that, if I have made sure that that is crystal clear in the MLS, that these items are included in the sale, and I get an offer that doesn't have these boxes checked off, guess what I have to do? I have to counter back, and I have to state, per paragraph 3P1, the following items are included in the sale of the property: stove, refrigerator, washer, and dryer. I have to put that in the counter because I don't want later on, when they left it blank, because listing agents do make the same mistakes in assuming things, as buyer's agents do, as sellers do, as buyers do. And listing agents sometimes say, well, I put in the MLS that those items were included. Well, because they weren't included in the contract, and now they're there at the close of escrow, they become the personal property of the seller and they become debris. And now whatever it costs for the buyer to get rid of those items is going to become the cost of it's going to become, a consequence to the seller that the buyer could go after them for damages because they didn't do what they were supposed to. And then if that happens, then your seller's going to be pissed off at you that you didn't clarify, right? So again, let's just slow it down a little bit. And if I'm the listing agent, I need to make sure that if I have included these items in the MLS to let people know, and they've written an offer where they're not included, I'm going to counter back and include them. Or I'm going to go to the seller and say, hey, seller, these buyers don't want those items. What do you want to do? Do you want to accept the offer like this? Do you want to force them to take it? What do you want to do? The other thing, too, that you may want to do, because the buyer's agents aren't always fantastic, is maybe reach out quick and say, hey, I got your offer. In the MLS, it said that the stove, refrigerator, and washer and dryer were included in the sale. You didn't include it in your purchase agreement. I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't an error, because now I'm going to put it in the counter that they're included, right? Have some communication. You could do that, especially right now, because it's not like you're getting 10 or 15 offers per property. You're getting 2, 3, 1, 2, or 3 offers per property. It's not like you're having this huge flood of offers that you have to go through. So when you start negotiating an offer and you're thinking about countering something, you can have a quick conversation with the buyer's agent. And if they say, no, we don't want it, then they're adamant that they don't want it, it wasn't a mistake, then you can have a conversation with the sellers that say, hey, they don't want them. What do you want to do? They've specifically told me they don't want them, and this is the one offer that we're negotiating. It's up to you. I understand that you want to leave these behind. I can still counter to do that, but you have to instruct me what you want to do next. That's it. So just make sure that you're going through this stuff on what's included and excluded, okay? Included items, and we're going to get to a list of them in paragraph 9, but included items by default are fixtures to the property, right? So we're talking about light fixtures, window coverings, right? So that means curtains, curtain rods, shades, shutters, anything that's covering your windows, that's a fixture, and that's supposed to be included. So if for some reason the seller wants to take all of the window coverings when they move out, you'd have to now counter that as an excluded item, right? So if you, listing agent, know that there are excluded items, you should put that in the MLS that they're excluded. You, as buyer's agent, should read the MLS instructions, and if there are excluded items, know that that's how you need to write your offer, so that, again, you're writing a stronger offer. If they don't do that, then you've got to counter immediately to exclude those items, because, like I said, by default, they're included. So if I don't have something physically in writing that says that everybody's agreed that they're not going to be included, I'm going to be responsible for them in the future. Right? Myself, probably listing agent more than the seller. And I've shared this story with you guys before, is I sold a property. The sellers were moving to Brazil. They wanted, they didn't want to take anything with them, but there wasn't things included in the sale. They were just going to sell furniture and appliances and things like that. The buyer's agents didn't request anything to remain, right? But we also didn't exclude anything. Day we recorded, I go to the house or the day before we're going to record, I go to the house and I see some people taking the stove out. Now, there's a built-in microwave above the stove. I didn't think anything of it. I made the mistake of not telling the sellers, that's a fixture, it's built into the property, it has to remain. Never told them that. So when I saw someone taking the stove, I didn't think they were also going to take the microwave. So when the people closed escrow, they left. The day they recorded, they got on a plane and flew to Brazil. They were out of the country. They were gone, my sellers. 2 days later, when the buyers moved in, I get a phone call from the agent that said, where's the microwave? I said, I'm sorry? They said, the microwave's gone. And they had uninstalled the microwave and sold it. When I finally got a hold of the sellers in Brazil on the telephone, they said, well, yeah, because it matched the stove. Who's going to buy the stove without the microwave? And I said, well, you can't take that. It's a built-in fixture to the property. And they said, well, you never told me that, which I didn't. So I had to pay for a microwave. So stuff happens. That was a lesson I learned. I was never going to forget that again, that I had to pay for a microwave to get installed for these people. So just make sure you're having the conversations with everybody about the inclusions and exclusions and what can and can't be. And it's just like stuff starts to happen too when as you do more and more business, you start to notice things. So if you walk in and you see people have these really ornate window coverings, you just mentioned, by the way, those window coverings are required to stay with the property. That conversation will then come up with, well, no, I wanted to take those. I paid this for, I'm going to use those. I'm going to, make them work in the new house. That's the kind of stuff that you want to make sure you're having those conversations with the seller, that's happening. And when you're a buyer's agent, ask the question of the listing agent. When you go and show the property, you see these ornate things. And in the chat, I think it's Danny just put in there about a chandelier, that he had to purchase a chandelier. Yeah, absolutely. We don't think to ask because we just like, well, it's here. It's the light fixture. It's going to stay. Oh, it's here. It's the window coverings. It's custom. What are they going to do with it? But learn to ask the questions. Hey, by the way, listing agent, I noticed that they have this, really beautiful window coverings. They do know that those are required to stay, right? Oh, no. They're taking those. Okay, so now it becomes a negotiation. It's just about communicating, right? I would suggest with things like light fixtures and ceiling fans and chandeliers and things of that nature, stuff that's super ornate or expensive that people see and think, oh, this is staying with the property. And as a matter of fact, probably think of it as a feature that helps them to make a choice on, this is a beautiful house and I want to buy it. If the truth is that those items are not remaining, even though they were required to per the contract, my advice to listing agent is ask the seller when you're doing your whole listing presentation thing, and once they sign the listing, and tell them, hey, by the way, I noticed that beautiful chandelier. You are planning on leaving that with the sale? Oh, no, that's been in our family for whatever. Okay, so you're planning on taking that with you when you leave? Yes, I am. My suggestion is let's get it down before we start marketing, replace it with something else, and then market the property that way. That way people know what they're getting. They don't see this chandelier, think, oh, this is what makes the house great, and then all of a sudden it's gone. Okay, so maybe start having those conversations prior to marketing about what needs to be. Hey, that ceiling fan is fantastic. That's a neat ceiling fan. Is that going to stay with the property? No, we're planning on taking that with us. Great, take it down now. Let's put up a different ceiling fan that you're willing to leave with the property. It's very straightforward. That's the best thing you could do. Now, some of the weirdest things that become included, excluded items are plants. So if you have any kind of landscaping, right? And especially if you're selling a house where somebody has roses, like where they have a rose garden that they tend to those roses, during your listing appointment, during your listing presentation, once they, at the time they sign, make sure that you ask the seller, by the way, those are beautiful roses that you have in your backyard that you've set up. Are you planning on leaving those with the property? Most of the time, especially people who are crazy about the roses and cultivate them and all that, the answer is going to be no. I would suggest that you tell them then, easiest way to do it, because we don't have to negotiate it, is put all of those rose bushes in a pot that you can then, keep them alive and thriving, and then you can replant them at your new house, because you're going to have to do that anyway when you move. Just do it now. And now that becomes personal property. We don't have to worry about negotiating that those aren't going to stay. So you have to start recognizing, you see those, the palm trees, right? Those little sago palms that are so expensive. Same thing, right? Those have to remain. And sometimes people want to take them with them because they're not cheap. So it's just conversations. Now, if they're unwilling to take your advice and take them out of the ground, pot them and make them personal property, then just know that that's going to be something you're going to have to negotiate. And at some point, it probably is going to limit the interest in the property when you keep telling everybody these roses that you guys are falling in love with, the landscaping that you love is going to be different when you get it, right? Because we're taking all that stuff. So just be aware of that. Have those conversations so that you're prepared going in. A lot of times we forget to even have that conversation with the seller, and we don't even know about the idea that those things aren't staying until we're already in escrow. It's happened so many times that you're halfway through escrow, buyers have already done their inspections, or they're in the middle of doing their inspections, and one day buyer shows up and all the roses are out of the ground and in a pot. And they're like, wait, what's going on here? And you're like, I don't know. You call the seller. Hey, seller, what's going on? All the roses are in pots. They're out of the ground. Oh, yeah, we're taking them with us. We're moving. Well, you never told me. Well, you never asked me. And now we got a problem, because now I have a contract that tells me that I was getting those roses, and now the seller's telling me I'm not. So we have an issue that we're going to have to deal with, and nobody wants to have to do that in the middle of an escrow, right? So just keep in mind those kinds of things. Those are conversations that could happen prior to the property ever being marketed, and it eliminates a lot of issues. And if you're a buyer's agent and you see that there are items that are supposed to be included or excluded, and it's an issue for your buyer, then address it, communicate with the listing agent, make sure your offer makes sense. But for the strongest offer, just follow the instructions that are given by the listing agent and the seller on things that are going to be included and not included. And if that affects the price that you want to offer, then that affects the price you want to offer, but you're still going to have to follow that direction, because even if you try to do something different or think you're going to get past them, the sellers are still going to take it, and you're still going to have an issue with the buyer in the end, and nobody wants that either. Okay? Any questions about included or excluded items? Anybody? No? We'll talk about them again when we get down to paragraph 9, obviously. All right. Allocation of costs. So we're going to talk about, we'll probably just talk about the first two, because we've only got 15 minutes left, and then I'll give you guys a chance to ask any questions that you might have. So the natural hazard zone disclosure report, including tax information, paragraph 3Q1. So that natural hazard zone disclosure report that we order from third-party companies, it replaces a mandatory disclosure, a statutory disclosure from the seller, which is the natural hazard zone disclosure statement, the NHD statement. The NHD statement form, as a matter of fact, you know what? Let's pull it up so you guys can see it while we're talking about it. Let's see, NHD. Where is this? Where is it? Well, I don't know why it's not coming up. I'm using the name wrong. Let's just go back to my purchase agreement. I'm going to get those forms later. I don't know what's going on. Oh, I think I got disconnected because it said timeout on here. The NHD report replaces the natural hazard disclosure statement, which is now the seller answers the questions. Are you in a flood zone? Are you in a fire zone? Right? All of those things. The problem is seller doesn't know that, right? So NHD statement can be replaced with this NHD report that we get from a third party. That's acceptable. That qualifies as the seller making a disclosure about any natural hazards in the area. So here where it says buyer, seller, or both, right? Like I have seen where listing agents refuse to have the seller pay for that, or a seller doesn't want to pay for it. The problem with that is that this is just an opinion. I could be wrong, but because it's just a feeling I have, and I don't like the idea of putting ourselves or our sellers in a position of weakness, right? The natural hazard disclosure, if I have the buyer pay for it, right? So the buyer pays for it, which means technically the buyer is ordering it. And just because the seller signs it, does that mean the seller delivered that document to that disclosure that's required by the state of California for the seller to provide? Does it really mean that the seller provided it? So it makes this gray area where I start to feel like we're opening up our seller to possibility of litigations, because you may have a buyer that'd be like, well, I paid for the report, so the seller really never disclosed to me anything about natural hazards. Yes, I do know about it, but the seller didn't do it. And could that be something that somebody could use against the seller in litigation? I just don't like that, having that weird gray area loophole. So my suggestion is, natural hazards don't cost that much to order them, right? They're not that expensive. If your seller refuses to order it, you pay for it. You as listing agent, just order it, pay for it, get it in there. Make sure that you're protecting your seller. And if you have a conversation where the seller goes, I am adamant, I'm not going to pay for it, I'm not going to provide it, again, have a record of it, right? Have a record of it that says, hey, the seller is the one who refused. I've told them a number of times that this could put them in a position where they could be liable for a non-disclosure item. And I've asked them and requested and advised them on what their requirements are, and they are refusing to do it. So have an email again with the seller. Hey, by the way, I just want to make clear, I have told you what the requirements are, and you guys are refusing to provide this report. Get something in writing from them. Generally, what happens when you do that, when you start doing stuff where like your buyer or your seller are not acting in their best interest, and you start asking them to sign a paper that says, I've told you that this is in your best interest, and you're still not doing it, and I go to the point where I need you to sign something or respond to an email, they usually kind of start to change their mind about like, well, maybe I am doing the wrong thing because he's doing a little CYA over there. That's going to leave me out in the cold, right? So just keep in mind that sometimes that works as a bit of a lubricant to get them to do the right thing. But my suggestion is, seller always pays for this, okay? Always. Just make sure that you're putting the provider of the NHD report, whoever that may be, and you're checking the box. Now, if you're asking for a specific one, you could do that. If not, you could just do seller's choice. Because we all know that in most of the time, no matter what I ask for as buyer, I'm probably going to get a counter back from the seller that says all services are seller's choice, or dictating what services are what. So if we're thinking about strength of offer, I want to reduce the amount of counters. And as long as a reputable company is doing the NHD, I'm good with it, right? Because they all are going to find, the issues that exist. Some are better insured than others, right? They could do all their sales pitches, but most of the companies that we use, everybody uses, one of three different companies, right? It's, my NHD, First America, but they use one of a few companies, and we all use those and we all trust them, okay? So that's the NHD report. My suggestion, always the seller. It protects them. This optional wildfire disclosure report, I think, is still confusing people. It says optional. This is the Fortress Wildfire report. You could order that report from your NHD companies. I think they all cost the same. And I don't want to quote the wrong price, but I think it's like $110 or something. I'm not positive. I talked to Brandon about it from First American, but I forgot. He and I had a conversation. I forgot the amount. I believe he said it was $110. I'm not 100% sure. But here's the thing. If you're the listing agent and you see this, right? And you don't want to pay for it, you have to counter it. If you don't counter it, you got to provide it, even though it isn't required. We had an agent here that got an offer for a property in Norwalk that is not in a high fire zone, that requested this fire disclosure, this Fortress Wildfire Disclosure. And they said, oh, well, it doesn't apply because we're not in. This has nothing to do with the fire hardening disclosure, right? So you guys know that when we're in, and I should have called Brandon and had him on this one, because he and I had talked about that we were going to maybe have him in here for this, and I should have. So tomorrow when he's at the meeting, I'm going to remind him to talk to you guys about it. But we know that there's the fire hardening disclosure, right, in the defensible spaces. That disclosure is required when the NHD report states that the property is in a high or very high fire danger zone. You're required to give that disclosure. This is an optional disclosure, this Fortress Wildfire Disclosure. It's optional. And what it does is it gets a little bit more detailed specifically where the fire danger is. And supposedly the advantage of this is to help lower the insurance costs for people because it's very specific on fire. And maybe even though the property is in a general high fire zone, specifically where the property is not, maybe that can help you with the insurance. That's really all it's for, is it's just to get into like a more detailed look at where the fire problems, the wildfire issues are. But in this case, the listing agent, what they did is they assumed, well, we're in Norwalk, we're not in a high fire zone, they don't need this, so they didn't do it. We got to the close of escrow, and the listing side, the buyer side was like, hey, where's our Fortress Wildfire Disclosure? Well, it doesn't apply. It does, because we asked for it. It applies. So you got to pay attention. You can't just assume that something is not applicable. You've got to address it. So if you get this asked for, even if you are in a high fire zone, you're not required to give this disclosure. You're not required to spend this money. So if that's the case, if you get an offer that has that the seller's requesting this, counter it out if you don't want to pay for it. Oh, okay, the report is $140. I was $30 off. I apologize. So it's $140 for that report. So if I don't want my seller to pay $140 because they're not required to, I don't have to. You could turn it around and say if the buyer wants this report, the buyer could pay for it. Okay? Vacant land, this report's not required for anything that we're talking about here. Q2 is not required for anything. If you're selling land and the NHD report says it's in a high fire zone, then you would still have to do that fire hardening in the defensible spaces disclosure. But just know that this is not required. So for you buyer's agents, don't ask. How do I know if the property, when you get your NHD report? That's how you know. So you generally, if you don't have the NHD report, you can't do this until you have it. So if you guys want to, if you're in an area where you think you might be somewhere that's, near the foothills and the mountains where there's a fire problem, order your NHD immediately. Again, like the rest of the reports, like we were talking about earlier, before I start marketing, let me order all my reports. Let me have everything, because then I find out, oh, it is in a high fire zone. Then I can start doing the other disclosures that I need. So thinking ahead. So just know this is not required. So don't ask for it if you're the buyer's agent, unless it is something that makes sense because it's in a high fire zone and you want that extra one, but it is optional. Know that there's no requirement for you to do it. If you're the listing agent and somebody has filled that out, please make sure you're countering to take it out. Okay? All right. So it is nearly 12 o'clock. Let's stop there and see if anybody has any questions. Does anybody have any questions on anything that we talked about or anything else that's going on right now? Contract related or otherwise? Oh, I see a hand from Bertha. Sorry, Bertha. Go ahead. Was this about what you wrote in the chat and I just didn't see your hand?
No, it is.
Oh.
Okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So when I get a listing, usually the escrows, they don't order NHD or reports until we actually open escrow, right? So you just mentioned as soon as I get a listing, I should order the report.
Yeah, why not?
So,
I just think I could look. Talk to your rep about any. First of all, the escrow shouldn't be ordering your NHD report, but talk to your rep. The things that you could get as soon as possible. Look, prelims. I used to order prelims as soon as I took a listing or had a listing. I would order the prelim. For a while, the title company stopped allowing you to order prelims unless you had an escrow. And I get that. They wouldn't do it. I guess it was because of cost. Talk to your title company now. I think more of them now are open to like, hey, I need the prelim early because whatever the issue is or whatever you want to be. They're open to doing it. Ask your reps, hey, can I order an NHD as soon as I take a listing so I have it that way I can provide all my disclosures to the buyer with a counteroffer if I wanted to. Okay. I could start, but have that communication with the rep you're using and see first. I'm just saying the more that we could do ahead of time prior to being in escrow, the more likely we're going to avoid having issues. like looking at a prelim, for example, I think for us as listing agents to not know exactly what's on the property and have to an issue that's on the property to have conversations with the seller and deal with the prior, it's a problem. Look, I have dealt with it in the past. I had a deal where I was representing the buyer. The listing agent didn't review the prelim, didn't talk about it with the seller. I looked at it, and the stuff that was on the prelim when I reviewed it looked normal, right? It wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It wasn't like it was judgments or tax liens or anything like that. It was normal stuff. Turns out one of the liens that still showed up on title had been paid off in like 1983. When escrow went to when we were trying to clear up everything and pay off all the liens, they found out that the seller was like, wait a minute, no, I paid that off. To get a hold of the company that did it, because they weren't like in business, I don't remember, they had to go to a physical location, look for a paper reconveyance because it was so old. That delayed us to close because they had to find. Good thing they found this paper reconveyance. A good thing for the seller, because if they hadn't, escrow probably would have held some money out of their closing, so title could have like bonded that was actually truly paid off. It was just, as a listing agent, that's our job, is to look at the prelim, and if there's an issue, if there's something on there, we know about it prior to marketing it so we could deal with it. Hey, you know what, before, if this isn't right, then let's not market the property until we get this cleaned up, because it's going to become an issue once we do. And then you start working with title, like, hey, seller says that this doesn't work. This isn't real. This doesn't belong here. And you can start working on it. So yeah, Bertha, I get it. Some people may not, but try. That's all you can do. And Maria put in there that she's the one who orders the NHD for you guys. So I think it is possible for you to do it. Okay, anybody else? Any other questions? Anybody? Nope. Okay, terrific. I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about this. I just hope that the stuff that I'm giving you gives you A, confidence in being great out there, and B, is making sure that you are protecting yourselves and your clients as much as humanly possible. So again, thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. Stay safe out there and be productive. Have a great day.